Thank you for your patience. And I'm sorry, I was very much muted there or on echo there. I apologize for that interference as we start today's webinar. If you have been with us in the past, you will notice that we have a different webinar platform. So on behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, we appreciate you jumping on Zoom with us today, along with the team from Enel. We are here to talk about profiting from energy flexibility. And again, we are so thrilled to have Peter and Giannis here today. We're going to go through a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to them. Please feel free to submit questions to one or both attendees during the presentation. We will do our very best to get to as many questions as we can before the top of the hour. That being said, if we don't get a chance to answer your question, we will do so as soon as the event wraps up. Somebody from the team will get in touch with you. Again, we thank you for being here today. The team has provided a copy of the slide deck for all attendees in the resources section. And at this point, as much as I'd like to keep talking, I'm going to turn this over to Peter and Giannis and rejoin you for the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Jess. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking some time to be with us today. My name is Peter Holtzoffel. I manage our utility practice here at Enel. So I'm responsible for developing, designing, implementing our solutions with vertically integrated utilities across North America, including both our front-of-the-meter solutions as well as our behind-the-meter solutions. So for front-of-the-meter, wind, solar projects, behind-the-meter, battery storage, and demand response. And I have more than a decade of experience here at Enel and previous experience in the energy industry prior to joining Enel. And now I'll kick it over to Giannis.
Thanks, Pete. My name is Giannis Jabani, and I'm the head of data acquisition and analytics here for Enel North America. My function, generally speaking, I'm responsible for overseeing the collection, accuracy, and utilization of customer data that comes into our platform on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis. We've got over 10,000 sites here in North America, and keeping a handle on everything that's going on is no small task. I come from a background in energy trading and have over a decade of experience in portfolio management, modeling energy market participation, and I'm pleased to be speaking with you today.
Great, thanks. So let's just dive right in here. So first, just a quick overview of who we are as Enel. So Enel has deep expertise, resources, and scale, which we leverage to deliver solutions across the energy transition roadmap. So those solutions include behind-the-meter solar plus storage, front-of-the-meter solar plus storage, fleet electrification for both municipal fleets such as city buses to commercial fleets for delivery and other services like that from electric vehicles, demand response, both PPAs and VPPAs, virtual PPAs, retail energy supply, and some emerging technologies and solutions such as green hydrogen. All of those are various solutions that we provide on-site or off-site or some combination of the two, and we're delivering these solutions across North America. And so just getting a quick snapshot here of our presence across North America. So you see in green specifically, those are areas where we're offering demand response, and we have more than 4.7 gigawatts of demand response. Areas just in orange represent where we have our solar footprint of 3.3 gigawatts of solar. And then the areas in blue represent where we have battery storage, 2.2 gigawatts of battery storage, including both behind the meter and front of the meter activities. And then area where you see a combination of different colors represent where we're offering multiple solutions to various C&I customers or to our utility partners. And those would include California, Texas, and portions of PJM and New York, as well as in ISO New England and portions of Ontario. So we are in total have more than 10.4 gigawatts of energy assets deployed across our North America footprint. And we have both, regional experience and local experience to support C&I customers and utilities across North America. So our agenda for today, we'll start by defining energy flexibility and its benefits, and then we'll talk about finding flexibility within your energy solutions. Then we'll talk about strategies for unlocking flexibility, looking towards the future of flexibility, and then finally we'll wrap up with plenty of time for Q&A. So starting off by defining energy flexibility and its benefits, we can really sort of take a step back and think at a high level about how to understand the value of flexibility. So here we're looking at, on the left-hand side, a graph of annual electricity demand for a theoretical system. And this is a summer peaking system, and looking at demand relative to available supply. And typically, in maybe the hottest summer periods across hottest summer times during the summer, there might be a few periods where demand spikes up and there has to be adequate supply to meet demand. And it's not uncommon for more than 10% of grid infrastructure costs to be spent to meet peak demand that occurs for those periods that represent less than 1% of the time. So utilizing existing assets, such as load flexibility, can help increase grid flexibility and system reliability at the lowest cost. And so that's ultimately what flexibility is doing, is rather than building those additional resources or expensive peaker plants, we can use existing flexibility within the demand side to help reduce the need for those resources during those few times where the demand spikes and we need to ensure that we can meet that demand with available supply. So over time, we've seen that electricity production costs are declining, thanks in large part to renewables, which have essentially a zero marginal cost for production. But delivery costs and system planning costs, such as transmission, distribution, capacity, are increasing. And so we haven't really been able to recognize the full potential of managing these costs with the addition of renewables and some lower cost resources, but flexibility can help us manage those total costs. And there's never been a greater need for flexible resources, which can be fast to market and are low cost, as we're seeing capacity shortages or other types of grid constraints where traditional resources would be expensive and take a lot of time to come to market. We can use existing flexibility to meet some of these high cost near-term challenges, as well as continuing to provide reliability and additional resources long into the future. So just some examples here from the right-hand side, talking about potential concerns about capacity shortfalls in markets like PJM, or we're hearing the same in MISO and other regions across the country, while we're also seeing the potential for demand response and other types of flexible resources to grow significantly in coming years. So there's this great need and also a great opportunity to meet that need through flexible demand side resources. So defining energy flexibility a little bit more clearly and its benefits specifically. So to keep supply and demand in balance, which is a critical responsibility for grid operators and system planners, it's traditionally focused on adding new supply or using supply to meet demand. But more and more, grid operators are looking to demand side strategies to help ensure grid balancing. And so energy flexibility is the ability to reduce energy use or shift that energy use to different times of the day to help balance supply and demand. And this flexibility offers savings for those customers that, or energy users that provide flexibility to the grid or to their utility, and additionally to savings, also revenue, by responding to requests by the grid operator, or as a result of price signals, to shift or reduce energy use during those periods. On the right-hand side of the screen here, what you're seeing is a graph of demand response activity within our portfolio of demand response programs. So these are dispatches within Enel's portfolio from 2013 to 2022. And what you see is that certainly in the summer months, we're seeing a lot more demand response dispatch activity since 2013 versus today. And what that's reflective of is not only a greater need for these resources and more programs, but also those programs that exist being used more frequently. So it used to be for even emergency programs that were used almost never. Now we're seeing those programs dispatched maybe 1-2 times a year, which is a significant increase over 0 or 1 time every 10 years. And we're also seeing programs that are providing more ancillary services, such as non-spinning reserves, spinning reserves, or frequency response. And those new programs are dispatched much more frequently to provide more granular flexibility to the grid throughout a given day or any period throughout the year, whereas some of the more historical emergency type programs were used only during periods of extreme peak demand or unexpected system conditions. And so why is flexibility so important to grid operators? Well, as demand for electricity increases, more and more resources are dispatched to meet that demand. And the resources that are dispatched at the highest or to meet the greatest need typically have the highest cost. So looking at this chart here on the right-hand side, we see various resources in the supply stack. And as demand increases, different resources are dispatched to meet that demand. And so baseload resources like nuclear, which are running almost all the time, or renewables, which are low cost but somewhat intermittent, tend to be our lower cost resources. But as demand rises towards peaks, we need to rely on peaker plants, or traditionally have relied on peaker plants, which are both expensive and fossil fuel intensive. And so by incentivizing flexibility and leveraging flexibility, grid operators can shift demand away from hours when peaker plants would be used and use the flexibility as an alternative. So there are both the cost benefits as well as environmental benefits of using flexible resources during periods of peak demand. And thinking specifically about a demand response event and what that looks like. We talked about both reducing load during periods of a demand response dispatch or shifting that load to another period. So demand response programs pay companies to reduce energy use in response to emergencies or other instances that threaten grid stability or are needed to help ensure balancing supply and demand. So here on the graph on the right-hand side, you see that as electricity demand increases and available supply starts to be short, you get to a point where electricity demand could potentially outstrip available supply. And so in that instance, demand response is dispatched, and all the customers that are participating, the C&I customers or other residential customers, are dispatched to curtail their usage and ensure that demand and supply balance. And these types of emergencies can be due to extreme weather or unexpected system issues, or can be, depending on the type of program, could be the result of a plant outage or just a unexpected change in supply or demand. So now we'll shift from what we were just discussing to opportunities for finding flexibility within energy solutions. So kick it over to Giannis.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so in part one, Pete covered what flexibility is and what it means to the grid. And here we're going to cover some of the different means by which you can pursue a specific flexibility solution that's offered either by a utility or a grid operator. So the simplest form of flexibility is energy efficiency. This should come at no surprise to you because efficiency has been around since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. But efficiency is basically doing the same amount of work or production with fewer BTUs or kilowatt hours of energy consumption. These days, there are several ways that you can think about pursuing some sort of efficiency solution. You could upgrade your heating or cooling systems to be more fuel efficient. You could do some insulation projects for your water, heating, or cooling system so they bleed less heat or cooling into the environment. You could replace windows or lights with ones that are more energy efficient and thus providing illumination or conditioned space at a lower ongoing cost. And the theme that all these have in common is that they provide a broad and continuous reduction to your energy consumption. So there's a couple of benefits of this. The good news is that this has a secondary impact of reducing your consumption during those critical peak windows, such as system peak conditions or monthly demand charges. And the other good thing to know is that there are tons of federal and state incentives for pursuing these types of efficiency projects. For example, Enel, we're based in Boston here, and Massachusetts has a program called Mass Save that works with residences, but also works with commercial customers on helping pay for things like insulating projects, electrifying equipment, and the like. So it's a good thing that you can think about pursuing, and there's even more that you can do that has been funded through the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The next level up of thinking about flexibility would be to consider participating in a demand response program, but demand response programs come in lots of different shapes and sizes. So Pete was highlighting, thinking about a critical system peak condition, and that most often is handled with a program like a capacity demand response program. So these are a good starting point for customers to think about. There's a pretty low frequency of response, 1 to 5 times a year. They have very, very healthy payments of $20,000 to $50,000 a year. And these programs get designed by grid operators many months or even years into the future. And they're designed with the purpose of making sure there are always enough power plants on the system and operating to keep the lights on. And they actually have a key metric that they think about when they design these capacity market programs, and that's called the loss of load expectation. Believe it or not, the utility is planning for the probability of a blackout, and they try to keep that probability below 1 day every 10 years is what they target for how many generators they need to have on the system. The next way of thinking about flexibility in the wholesale market is probably the least common or least popular that we would see for customers thinking about flexibility, and that would be participating in the energy market as a price responsive load. So the good thing about the energy market is you can opt in or opt out on a daily basis. The whole point of the energy market is that it's where buyers of electricity and sellers of that electricity meet in the marketplace and have your typical Econ 101 supply demand curve that sets the price of electricity on a 5-minute or hourly basis on a day-to-day basis. And typically, in the plot that Pete was showing earlier, the cost to customers of just the wholesale procurement of energy typically ranges from $25 to $50 a megawatt hour. Though in cases like we're seeing now in Texas with the heat wave that's going on, prices can sometimes rise quite high to even as high as $4,000 per megawatt hour. And these transactions take place in the day-ahead market, which clears typically 4 p.m. the day before consumption, as well as the real-time market, which clears on a 5-minute by 5-minute basis in most wholesale regional transmission operators. The next level up for demand response, at least in the wholesale market side of things, is thinking about an ancillary services program. These are sometimes called spinning markets or reserves, and they exist because system operators need to ensure that if a large power plant were to trip offline, that the whole system would not cascade into a failure. And so just like you would think about wanting to have all of the trains on a given rail system running at the same speed, grid operators are thinking about having the grid ticking along at a constant frequency of 60 hertz. So these programs are they pay more, but they dispatch much more frequently, and they require very sophisticated pieces of equipment in order to trip your machinery or tripped off to a backup generator or some sort of DER in response to a grid contingency. And the last type of flexibility program that I'll mention on this slide here is actually not a wholesale or grid facing, but a on-bill utility facing program, and that's dealing with demand charges. So every utility has a way of passing on the transmission and distribution costs that they face, which is the cost of maintaining the poles and wires that go from the high voltage highway of electricity down to your local business. And the way that they allocate those is by having demand charges that typically act on a daily or monthly basis. And they're charged in dollar per kW month or dollar per kW year, according to the actual delivered power that you get to your local business. And these can be both the most remunerative option that you can pursue, but also one of the more difficult ones, because any given day of the month could be the day that you set your peak. And so it can be very difficult to suss out your tariff and parse it into the different time of use periods and figure out how to actually make those kW reductions that result in on-bill savings showing up onto your bill. There are also demand charges that are geared around more of system peak conditions. You guys may have heard of 4CP or the PJM PLC or the Ontario Global Adjustment Program. That's probably a great example to think of, where in Ontario, customers face a demand charge of $500,000 per megawatt per year, according to their consumption during the 5 highest hours on the system every summer. So these are all different ways that you can think of, and they actually have different times in terms of how long you have to respond to them. So capacity markets typically have the most lead time for actually responding to a curtailment instruction that comes from a grid operator. Those can be, in some instances, up to a week in advance. Energy and demand charges are typically dealt with on an hourly or up to a day-to-day basis. And then ancillary programs, like I mentioned, are the most technically challenging to participate in. Those you need to be able to respond in minutes or even seconds in some instances. One way that you can think about participating in these types of flexible solutions would be if you were to install a battery energy storage system, or a BESS. The way a battery can work here is that you can store energy by charging it, consuming power from the grid at times when prices are low, and then you can discharge the battery and empty it out. You can do that either in response to a demand charge window, such as a time of use billing period. You can also do it in response to a demand response activation and get to benefit from that solution in that way. There are really sophisticated forecasting and optimization software services that underlie this type of resource. But the good thing that if you were to pursue a solution like this is that it's relatively hands-off. And once it's installed, you leave it up and running, and it's able to manage things and co-optimize to find the best savings for your business. One instance of how this might work, in this case, thinking about a DER system that is a solar panel and a battery energy storage system, would be the following 4 steps. So the first thing would be, of course, you ink a contract to finance the DER system. In this example, Enel is putting up the cash, and the customer would either enter a fixed power purchase agreement, or PPA contract, or enter into a benefit share where the revenues and costs are shared between the 2 parties. Second thing would be that system would then be installed, operate, and shift around the load, just like was shown in the prior slide, trying to avoid demand charge windows, trying to discharge for demand response events. Also, in the case of a PV system, just generating electrons and lowering your consumption during the middle of the day when the sun is up, and hopefully reducing your utility bill. The third piece would be that Enel would enroll that DER system sitting behind your customer meter into the different grid services programs. And in exchange for providing the electric service to the grid operator, would get paid for that participation, either by the utility or from a system operator. And then the final step would be that there would be a settlement up between the DER provider, Enel in this case, and the customer, according to whatever the contractual terms were of the contract. So that's a simple example, not so simple because there are 4 different steps, but hopefully you get the picture of how these systems work in practice when implemented both on a technical and a contractual basis. Finally, the most advanced way of thinking about flexibility would be to think about the Internet of Things and automating your loads to be able to participate in all the different programs that I have previously been talking about. So different examples here would be having smart thermostats. So if you've got nests or lighting systems that are able to, temperature systems that are able to dynamically set points and change them in response to demand response activations or time of use periods. The second thing you could think about here would be some sort of building automation. A building management system or BMS system can control things like HVAC loads, lighting, cooling, and the like. And these types of systems can be integrated with the Open Automated Demand Response Protocol, or OADR, which is an industry standard for being able to send and receive and respond to instructions from grid operators or utilities to respond to demand response events. And then the last thing I'll highlight here is you can think about small asset aggregations, whether we're talking about thermostats, we're talking about BMS systems, or maybe we're talking about EVs or smart lighting systems or energy storage systems. All of these can be aggregated into virtual power plants that enable a smart city, essentially, to operate and participate in a holistic manner. And you can work with a DER provider like Enel on integrating any one of these solutions into your participation in any one of the different markets. Our saying that we have is any asset, any market, any value stream, and we really want to live by that. And finally, the last thing that I'll highlight is that these programs respond at different times of day. So demand response programs, typically happen during peak usage on the system, which would usually be around 3 to 5 p.m. Demand management windows are peak windows that really can happen any time of day. They could be 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 5 a.m., 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. But often we see a lot of demand management, demand charge windows happening in the early evening that you may be thinking about shifting some of your consumption. And then or I guess really wherever your actual facility peak demand is. So not caring about the system peak, but comparing about your particular facility's peak. And then the last thing you can consider is thinking about energy arbitrage. So the price of power, like I mentioned in the energy market, varies every 5 minutes of every day. And you can shift your consumption from when it's hot and expensive in the middle of the day to overnight, where consumption and demand on the grid is less contested. So with that, I'm going to hand things back to Pete to talk about strategies for unlocking your flexibility.
Great, thanks, Giannis. The opportunities for flexibility and unlocking flexibility exist across all industries and sectors. And Enel specifically, we've worked and enabled more than 20,000 commercial industrial facilities for demand response to date, unlocking that flexibility and helping those customers develop customized energy reduction plans to be successful, maximizing their participation and their earnings from demand response programs. And so really critical in the flexibility development process is to work with a provider that has a significant amount of experience working with various customer types like your operations and like your business, such that they're finding that flexibility, but then also ensuring that it has the least amount of disruption to your operations, such that you can keep doing what your core business is. And participating in demand response and unlocking your flexibility is just one more benefit to you as a business, but certainly not something that you want to get in the way of your core operations. And so, we see flexibility and demand response participation from plastic companies, from cold storage facilities, food and beverage manufacturing, stadiums and arenas, the oil and gas industry, refineries, pipelines, more traditional manufacturing, schools, you name it, hospitals. There is potential within every single industry to participate in demand response and unlock that flexibility. And we've certainly seen those examples, everything from a thread manufacturer that's able to participate in demand response programs by shutting down things like spinners and other pieces of equipment, to even parking garages more and more that have electric vehicle charging infrastructure and are able to curtail some of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure to participate in demand response programs and provide that flexibility. So the opportunities are endless, but as I mentioned, really working with a provider that has a significant amount of experience working with various industries and sectors to unlock that flexibility and ensure that there's minimal, if any, impact on operations. In terms of where we're finding that flexibility and how various customers, specifically C&I customers, unlock that flexibility, it really comes from a wide variety of assets. Many of these assets are not typically essential to the day-to-day operations of your facility or don't need to be running 24/7, 365. While some organizations shut down all processes to maximize earning or their participation in a program, others focus on just small bits of very minimally disruptive equipment or operations that have very little impact on core operations. So in terms of heating and cooling, we see adjustments to HVAC set points, shutting off certain air handlers, reducing water heating. In terms of machinery, we see shutting down process lines, turning off pumps, turning off compressors. With refrigeration, we see, turning off chillers or turning off defrost elements related to refrigeration, or curtailing refrigeration systems altogether. And there are opportunities, as Giannis alluded to previously, related to controls, where we can control lighting, non-essential lighting, control certain pieces of equipment through even things like basic relays. Doesn't have to necessarily be incredibly sophisticated controls, but certainly the more sophisticated can oftentimes get to and unlock maybe additional levels of flexibility that aren't accessible with just very basic controls, or things like set points, whether it be a temperature set point on a smart thermostat, or maybe set points for lighting and temperature through a more sophisticated building management system. And then that one next step further in terms of leveraging automation, as Giannis mentioned previously, so that it's really, your participation can be more hands-off and have all of these activities happening in the background. And, many don't require a lot of support from key personnel to implement energy reduction plans. So rather than having, any manual components, the entire process can be fully automated. And you can use things like machine learning to facilitate and simplify flexibility. And those opportunities exist across almost all industries. And as Giannis mentioned, tools like an energy storage system that's paired with a software optimization platform, or building management systems that have specific scripts that can be run during demand response events to adjust or control those minimally disruptive or non-invasive pieces of equipment or building operations that can be curtailed during demand response events. And all of this can happen in response to market prices or weather, or grid conditions. So there's lots of various ways that you can have this operate in the background to optimize your earnings and minimize disruption. So finally, we'll just give a quick case study of a customer of ours at Enel, who sort of how they found their way through the flexibility journey, if you will. So Ecobat is a world leader in battery recycling and lead production. And initially they started working with us in New York, just participating in some of the wholesale market demand response programs and utility demand response programs, to unlock their energy flexibility and earn revenue from their energy flexibility. And as they became comfortable with more basic demand response, they moved into additional solutions that unlocked more flexibility, on-bill savings, and increased their sustainability by doing solar and storage on site for their facility in New York. And working with us in New York and finding their way through this flexibility journey in one location, they recognize the opportunities and the benefits, which they have expanded to cover more of their facilities across various regions, where they're able to now think about what they're doing on a portfolio basis across all their facilities and how to be able to unlock flexibility, maximize their revenue, and increase their sustainability across their entire footprint versus just in a single location. And so Ecobat has seen great value from their work with us to unlock their flexibility and generate revenue from demand response, and then take those learnings and apply it across their footprint. So now I'll pass it back to Giannis to talk about the future of energy markets and the potential to grow flexibility over time.
Thanks, Pete. So in this last section, we are going to step way back and go from the tactical to the 20,000-foot view, and just take a couple look at some trends that are happening in the energy space. And I should maybe also add that these are my own opinions and maybe not necessarily representative of Enel as a business. So just bear with me here. First thing that I wanted to highlight is that electrification is here, it's happening, and the renewable development explosion is well upon us. To start off with a stat that you guys may not know, I didn't know it until about a couple weeks ago. The global sales of internal combustion engine cars have already peaked. Not only have they already peaked, but they peaked 5 years ago in 2017. Sales of EVs have been growing around the world at around 30 to 40% per year. It have now passed over 10 million cars who are electric sold per year, eating into the existing market share of internal combustion engine cars. Not only that, but solar and wind interconnection queues alone are already existing in much of the United States that exceed the current system demand of those markets. So shown here on the right is the system peak estimated for a number of markets in North America: PJM, the Midwest, ISO, ERCOT in Texas, CAISO in California, SPP in sort of the Oklahoma heartland area going all the way up, and New York and New England. And you can see that in almost all of these markets, there's more solar and wind that's waiting to hit the interconnection queue, meaning they've applied for, they have a site, they have financing, they're waiting to get approved to start construction and interconnect onto the system in all of these markets. So if even 50% of the megawatts in these queues hit the market, that's going to be a huge change around the entire country. I don't know if many of you have heard of this, but in California, there's this well-known image called the duck curve. And so it's a plot of the system demand in California year by year. And what you see is it's turning more and more into the shape of a duck, where load ramps up in the morning, all of the solar ramps up in the middle of the day and demand actually goes down. And then at the end of the day, when demand is still very large, but the sun is now waning, demand ramps up on the system to another second peak before finally falling overnight. And as renewables enter all of these markets, we're going to start seeing a lot more duck curves around the world and around North America. So what does this mean? One thing that we could see happening, and this is pure speculation on my part, is that we could see sort of an electrification and gas death spiral start to appear. So as renewables flood the market and customers, it becomes cost effective for customers to start electrifying equipment. So think of a residence in California that's swapping out an oil tank or a gas boiler for a heat pump to do some of their heating needs. Think of people obviously installing all sorts of EVs and electrified other pieces of equipment. So as people electrify, that is going to, for the most part, reduce some of the gas consumption on the local system, wherever it's happening. The less people that actually use the gas system, well, because these local networks of pipelines and compressor stations, they all have a very high fixed cost. And these gas companies need to recuperate that cost in order to stay in operations. So if their usage and utilization and the number of customers that they have is going down, they may need to charge more for their remaining gas customers. Well, that's going to raise the price of gas relative to electricity, which is already cheap. And that could trigger more electrification and lower gas system utilization and higher costs for the remaining users, and so on and so forth. I think a key question, there are two key questions that I have. One, how sticky is gas demand really going to be, especially for the heavy industrial and hard to decarbonize industries like fertilizer production, industrial petrochemicals, cement or steel manufacturing. And two, what's going to happen with induced demand potentially replacing what's lost to electrification, or additional loads electrifying, raising demand for electricity and offsetting the reduction in costs that would otherwise come from renewables. I think there are a number of questions that one can still ask. So in a world of abundant green hydrocarbons, for example, how are those going to compete with purely electrical counterparts? The end result of both of these trends that I expect we'll see in the coming years is that the price volatility and the corresponding value of flexibility will be going up for the foreseeable future. So similar to what I was talking about on the gas side of things, on the electrical side of things, there are a number of fossil burning power plants that make up the majority of the production on the grid. And those power plants, the marginal producing power plant, which marginal means the last one that is operating at the point that it sets the price, those plants also have fixed capital and operational expenditures that they need to recuperate by buying fuel, converting it into electricity, and then selling that electricity. So if I'm trying to say that the cost of fuel may be going up because it's going to be allocated amongst fewer customers, then those power plants are going to see their profit margins go down. And so how are they going to make that up in order to stay in business? I think one thing that I expect to see is that the hours that these power plants are able to run, so they're going to be more and more hours where the marginal producing unit is a renewable power source, whether it's a solar farm or a wind farm or maybe a nuclear. There are going to be more instances where those resources are clearing because they have a very low marginal cost of producing power. The sun shines for free, whether or not you want it to. The wind blows for free, whether or not you want it to. And so there's no marginal cost that's going into the selling electricity once the asset exists. We've even seen in some markets like Germany, there are now periods where there are negative prices on the grid because it's more, it's less cost effective for certain power plants to be shutting off only to have to turn back on at a later period, it actually makes sense for them to keep running, even though there's too much electricity on the system, and they literally have to pay to send power onto the power lines. And at the same time, in times like we have this week, where it's 105 degrees in Austin, there are going to be times where the real-time price, like it is down there, is shot up to $4,000 per megawatt hour. And this is the type of behavior that I expect to become more common on more markets as renewables start to penetrate, which is good news for you if you're willing to invest in flexibility, because not only could there be a future where you get paid to consume power during times when renewables are abundant and the price is cheap or negative, but also you get paid on the other side when prices are really high to respond to demand response activations and respond to critical peak conditions. So there's much to gain from investing and thinking about this now, and companies like Enel are here to help you. So that's all the content that we have for today. I think at this point we'll switch to questions.
Yes, and thank you both for a great presentation today. We do have a few questions that have come in from attendees, but before we get started on some of those questions, I do just want to thank both of you for being here, for putting on such a fantastic and informative webinar, as well as your back-end staff. It's been great to work with the team at Enel as always. So let's jump into it. This is a question that actually has come up a couple of times. What is the cost to have my facility assessed for its flexibility and potential to participate in demand response programs?
Thanks, Jess. I can take that question.
Yep.
So typically there would not be a cost associated with that. I mean, certainly at Enel, we don't charge a cost for the assessment. And as I mentioned, pretty much every type of customer, residential, commercial, industrial, is going to have some demand response or flexibility potential. And so ultimately, the typical contract includes a revenue share or some benefit flowing to both parties. So ultimately, the provider should see that there's opportunity there and not be looking to charge for that type of assessment. I would be wary if somebody were charging for that, but certainly we don't on the Enel side.
I mean, that makes sense. And I guess from working, with the different clients you've worked with, what are some of the biggest barriers in terms of dealing with stakeholders? How do you get that stakeholder buy-in for those who are really, on the edge or a little bit reserved when it comes to, the benefits of renewable energy at this point? And
Giannis, do you want to take that? Do you want me to follow up on that? It's up to you.
Why don't you go for it first?
Sure. So, I mean, I think we provide a number of kind of risk mitigation factors in helping customers get comfortable with participating in demand response programs or unlocking that flexibility. First, operating as an aggregator, we shield customers from any sort of penalties or risk associated with participating in a program. So that certainly helps, knowing that they're never going to be in a position where there would be out-of-pocket costs for trying to participate in demand response. Like I said, our core operating approach is to ensure that what you're doing for demand response and flexibility does not impact your core operations or create any more financial uncertainty. So that's one way that we get customers more comfortable. The other is by providing these customized energy reduction plans. So being able to share information about other companies just like yours that have participated in demand response and how they've done it and what techniques they use. And then finally, providing additional tools, software, real-time energy monitoring that gives customers visibility into what their energy use is, how to ensure strong performance, and that's available to them in real time such that they can see, when there's a demand response event, that they're performing and reducing load as would be expected. So lots of different ways to overcome what can be initial hesitation from participating in demand response.
There's two things I can add to that. The first is that I know a lot of times there's a concern around budgeting and capital expenditures. And to that point, if you're interested in pursuing like a PV system or a storage system, a lot of times that can be done at no upfront cost. Companies like Enel are happy to front the cost of installing that equipment, which can be high, and are willing to get sort of paid back over time. And the second thing that I'll add to get over objections is to start small. Pete added in the example with EcoBat that they started with one service and then went from there. So you don't need to boil the ocean up front. Just think about what's the lowest lift way that I can get started and go with that.
Great advice. And I think that's starting small and not overwhelming yourself is something that, companies are looking at, not just with their energy management, but in terms of sustainability goals and ESG goals too. Is it can be overwhelming, but starting small and then building on, each step at a time is something that is applicable to companies big and small. So let's talk about starting from the start process. So a client meets with you. How long is it going to take to get them up and running? Now, I know this is going to be dependent on the size of the company, what type of analysis you have to do, but is there any type of a ballpark? I know you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I know no company wants to do that. So in your experience, and maybe it's industry based too, I'd love to get some feedback regarding that. And Giannis, I don't know if you want to take that one for us.
Sure. Yeah, I think it depends on what type of service you're hoping to get into and what type of equipment that you have on site and how much might be needed to get installed to be able to participate. This sadly is one where it really does vary by market, by technology, by service that you're trying to get into. But it can range from anywhere from, we've seen a couple weeks to get into some demand response programs where customers got all the buy-in they need. They're willing to move quickly on setting up their energy reduction plan. They've got some of the equipment on site that we need to be able to get access to their data and monitor them so we can enroll them into a program. And then the other extreme would be thinking about a larger capital project like a storage system or a solar facility that's going to be on site. And that can certainly take anywhere from 1 to multiple years to get fully onboarded. But we're there to onboard pieces as they're ready and get started with things as we can.
Yeah, I think on average, it's typically about 90 days from maybe an initial conversation with a new prospect to having them ready to respond in a program. But as Jan has mentioned, that kind of average is includes those customers that are very fast to market, that are low technology and tend to be more manual curtailment versus a customer that wants to move right into automation, leveraging distributed energy resources that could take a year or two. So
which definitely makes sense. And this question you kind of touched a little bit upon it, Pete, but it's about curtailing. So how much does my organization have to curtail to participate in demand response?
Sure. For most commercial industrial customers, it's maybe 100 kW or more. But that said, like we have some, whether it be small retail or commercial property that have multiple sites across a single jurisdiction. And then in that case, maybe each site is only curtailing 5 to 25 kW, but in aggregate, they're, getting up to 100 or 200 kW. But that range is, around 100 kW of curtailable load, all the way up to, we have some steel mills that will do a full shutdown and curtail 50 megawatts. So it's a very, very wide range. But I think that, as I mentioned, there's pretty much flexibility in every industry, every sector, every size. If you're a really small load without multiple facilities in a single jurisdiction, it'll probably make it hard to be financially viable without much more than 100 kW.
Got it. Giannis, did you have anything you wanted to add before I go to you with what's probably going to be our last question?
One thing I can add is that, certainly all shapes and sizes. We have a ton of customers who are school districts all around the country that can be quite small on an individual basis. And the smallest customer that I'm aware of is a single gas station along the Mass Pike in Massachusetts that has an EV charger that's ours, that's participating in demand response. So really can go the full gamut.
Excellent, excellent. We actually are, we can stay on for a little bit past the top of the hour for those who can. We do want to be mindful of everybody's time. We did just have some other questions come in. Peter, you talked about having the cost or having an analysis done before, signing on. Can you talk a little bit more about receiving a cost savings analysis? And then what specific data do you need from a company in order to get that information?
Sure. Typically, it's a combination of a couple things. So first, we're hoping to get as much historical energy usage data that we can get. If bills is all the customer has, we'll use that and try to take, whatever information we can glean from those bills, monthly kWh, peak demand. But ideally, we have some interval data, historical interval data that we can use to sort of help understand what typical energy usage looks like relative to the grid services or demand response revenue streams that are out there, and combining that data with the understanding of what the programs are and what the customer's operations look like, and where the flexibility is. That really helps us develop what we refer to as a statement of financial opportunity. We look at the operations, we look at the data, develop a sort of a draft energy reduction plan with an estimated curtailment potential, align that to the programs, and then put that in front of a customer and talk through, what it's going to take to achieve those financial goals or financial potential. So it's all those factors together, but the data that we're really looking for is usage data as granular as we can get, and then really understanding operational data, understanding what how the business operates, and what parts of those operations could potentially be flexible, either with existing technology or through the potential of adding additional technologies to those operations over time.
Excellent. Giannis, did you want to add before I go to you for the next question?
Yeah, sure. One thing I can add is that one of my roles is managing an analytics team. And like Pete said, we've onboarded over 20,000 customers into our portfolio. And so one benefit of working with a company like Enel is that you're probably not the first customer to come to us asking what their fit might be. And so we are able to go through and try to, pull out and compare and calibrate what a reasonable expectation would be. And we try to provide that to customers up front.
Which is great to know, because people always want to know what the bottom line is going to be and what their cost savings are, what their cost savings might look like, knowing that there are going to be, factors that could change the ultimate, end point. I'd love to get both of your opinions on this question. So how has energy flexibility evolved the most over the past 10 to 15 years? And I'll keep it with you, Giannis, for this, and you can pass it off to Peter when you're done.
Yeah. I think the biggest theme that we've seen is it's gone from simple and slow to complex and fast over the last decade of my time here in the energy industry. Enel and the company that was acquired before it was really one of the pioneers and one of the very first demand response companies in some of these simpler programs and PJM and ISO New England. And ever since that, regulatory bodies, grid operators, all they've wanted is more flexible, more fine-tuned, quicker responding. And so we've been meeting them on that journey and trying to grow it in our own business.
Yeah, I think Giannis, that really captures it. I think historically we saw a lot more manual curtailment, so people actually walking around and shutting off pieces of equipment. And now today we're seeing so much more control and automation, and I think that just is reflective of sort of the growth of Internet of Things and just the ability to communicate with so many different types of machinery. So I think we'll expect to see that increase in the future. So that has kind of come at the same time that demand response has done a great job of really proving itself over the years as being a resource that can really help grid stability and reliability, and that has just fed into its ability to provide other types of grid services with the same level of confidence that demand response can be there as a reliable resource. Kind of all these great factors coming together to get us to where we are today.
And I can't think of a better way to close up today's event than Peter, what you just said. So I do want to thank your entire team again. I want to thank the attendees who were able to join us live today, as well as those who are going to be watching this on demand. The archived event will be available shortly for all attendees. There will be a survey that pops up on your screen at the conclusion of the event, or it will be emailed to you. Please take some time. It's a very short survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. And I apologize if you hear the noise in the background, but my dogs have made their way close to my office at this point. So again, Giannis and Peter, thank you. And thank you to your team. We appreciate everybody being here today. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks. Great to be here.